chat about all the books that I read in August and September. So I decided not to do an official August wrap up because I read 2 books. That's it. So I thought that would be kind of boring. So I decided to smush August and September into one video, and then I forgot to do it, which is why it's coming to you mid-October, but it's fine. It is fine. So let's go ahead and get into it. I am going to separate my August and September stats. I'm a stat girly. I absolutely love looking at all the data and all the graphs and, you know, my average ratings and what days I read, stuff like that. So without further ado, let's get into it. In August, I read 2 books, as I said, and 1,055 pages. The first book that I read was Powerless by Lauren Roberts. This book is gorgeous. It is such a beautiful cover. I think even the book, yes, without the dust jacket. Is that what this is called? The dust jacket? I think so. I mean, that is stunning. It is so pretty, and it's just, so I really enjoy the cover of this book. That's about it. I fell for the hype. I fell for all the hype surrounding this book, and I gave it 2 stars. I'm sorry, I did not like it at all. Powerless is if you haven't heard about it by now, it's a young adult fantasy enemies to lovers book. It is the first book in a series. I think it's a trilogy. I know that there's a novella and the second book out now, neither of which I will be reading. I just found this book to be annoying, unfortunately. And I know that I'm about to turn 25, so I'm probably aging out of the young adult section, but I do enjoy young adult fantasy still, because sometimes adult fantasy is just a little bit too much. You know, sometimes you just want a little bit of that teenage angst. Most of what I read in this video is young adult fantasy. I have 4 young adult fantasy books. So I really don't want to hate on the genre, but this was just bad. I feel like so many of the, not necessarily the tropes, but like specific details in this book were straight up stolen from other books, like Hunger Games, Shatter Me. There was another big one. I'll have to put them on the screen. I mentioned it in my review on Goodreads. And if you read any negative reviews on Goodreads, they all say the same thing. So I like reading this book, it didn't feel like there was a single original thought. So much of it felt plagiarized, just like copy pasted into this book, which was really upsetting. I also found the banter and the dialogue to be extremely repetitive and annoying. They just went back and forth with, oh, I'm gonna kill you and I'm gonna hold a dagger to your throat, and oh, but you know, I'm just so sexy and hot, and I don't know. It was just so boring. So they couldn't make up their minds on whether or not they were enemies. They were very obviously enemies, they knew it, but there are some quotes in here. I'm not gonna read them to you. I'm not. I've read them to so many people in my life because I'm like, this is just so bad. Like, it is just so bad. It feels like she wanted every line to be a mic drop of a line. You know, those big lines that you're like, oh, I'm gonna underline that, or I'm gonna like post that quote onto Pinterest or talk about it to people. It feels like that she did that with every single line, and it's not good. It doesn't make sense. It just feels like a kid with a sticker book just put all these stickers all over it, and it's not a pretty picture. I don't think this was very good. I'm so sorry to everyone who enjoyed it so much. I'm so glad that you enjoyed it. You know, I'm not one to yuck someone else's yum. If you liked this, I'm so happy for you. I did not, and I'm just gonna leave it there. So the next book I read was actually on my Kindle. Look how cute she is. I am showing you this to distract you from the fact that I do not have it pulled up on my Kindle, so just give me a moment. Okay. Is it okay that I can just pull up the poster of it? Please just hold on. I'm so sorry. Okay. The next book I read was Magic Study by Maria V. Snyder. I desperately hope that this is focusing and you can see it, because otherwise that will all have been for a waste. Will have been a waste. I don't know. Anyway, this is the second book in the Poison Study series. I read Poison Study in July, maybe. It was on my TBR for literally forever, and I found it at the library. And then I realized that they've been on Kindle Unlimited this entire time. I really enjoyed Poison Study, read it in a day, okay? Read it in a single day. I ate it up. It was so entertaining. Magic Study was good. I gave it like 3 stars. Again, it's young adult fantasy. We're just continuing, so I can't really talk too much about the plot, but I do think that this author really excels in world building and creating a easy to follow magic system that I really haven't seen anyone else do, so I'm very impressed with that. And the pacing of the stories is really good. One thing I didn't love about this whole trilogy is how much the author relies on brutality against women to carry the plot forward. The entire first book was very reminiscent of like torture and rape and just all these sorts of assault and violence, and that carries into the second book, and it's just a very prevalent theme that I feel like we could have done without. I think she definitely could have gotten a little creative and found other ways to drive the plot forward, which is why I gave it 3 stars, just because it was a little much for young adult, if I'm being honest. The writing, the characters, the story, young adult. How much we reference violence and sexual assault and things, a little adult. So I would have loved to see less of that, but I do still think it was a good book. Like I said, I gave it 3 stars. Now we are moving into September. In September, I read 5 books, so doing better. And I read 1,832 pages. My average rating for this month was 4.13, which is crazy. Like, I read so many good books in September, and I'm so excited to talk to you about them. The first one, possibly my favorite book of the year, The 4 Winds by Kristen Hanna. Do you see the tabs? Like, I annotated so much of this book. The quotes, the writing. Ugh. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. The 4 Winds by Kristen Hanna it's historical fiction. If you don't know about Kristen Hanna, this is the second book I've read by her. Her books tend to be historical fiction, women's literary fiction. So she writes women so well. The best I've ever seen it. This book specifically is about this woman, and it's set in like the Dust Bowl era in Texas. So I live in Texas. That was cool. So it starts with her as like in her 20s, and then it jumps forward, I think like 10 years or something. And that's where the story really takes off. It is her with her family, and they're just living on a farm in Texas. And then the Dust Bowl happens, and you're following them struggle, mainly the woman, so the mom and her daughter. Kristen Hanna writes mother-daughter relationships so well, like specifically mother-daughter relationships that are like not great. Like they have a lot of tension, and they butt heads a lot, and just it isn't your romanticized mother-daughter like Gilmore Girls style relationship. Like it's real. It's hard to read at times, but this story is a struggle book. Like I was so worried about them. They were on my mind. This family was on my mind the entire time I read it. I started the audiobook which highly recommend. The narrator is amazing. I started with the audiobook, loved it so much that I went out and bought a physical copy just so I could annotate, because the quotes, like I was listening to it and I was like, man, I wish I could underline that. Like I wish I could write that down. Like that was so good. I'm always gonna remember that line. So I went out and bought it so I could do just that. It is a very, very, very descriptive read. Like I said, it's a struggle novel. Like it's hard to read at times just because you're like, oh my gosh, how much more can this family go through? Like how much more can this woman go through? I found myself, I'm not even joking, praying for them. They're not real. These are just words on paper. They don't exist. But I was like, oh Lord, help them get through this. And then I was like, what am I doing? Like, props to Kristen Hanna for making me care that deeply about people who don't even exist. 5 stars. If that wasn't obvious enough, absolutely 5 stars. The ending wrecked me. Wrecked me. I won't say anything else, but please read it. The next book that I read was another book on my Kindle, and it was actually Fire Study by Maria V. Snyder. This was the 3rd book in the Poison Study trilogy. So again, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this one because it is a continuation of a trilogy, so I don't want to give too much away, and I already talked about Magic Study. I gave it like 3.5 stars. I thought it was good. I definitely think like I started really strong and it just it felt like the story was dragging in places, but overall, like I'm really glad that I finished it. I think it all came full circle. The ending was a little bit weird, but overall it was very entertaining and I am happy with it. Would I recommend this series to anyone? Probably not. Just if I'm being honest, I enjoyed it, but that's just such a weird series to recommend just because of how much stuff happens. But again, overall, I would probably give the series like a 3. I enjoyed it. The next book that I read was actually an audiobook. Oh, nope, I'm ahead of myself. Back it up. The next book that I read was another young adult fantasy, and it's one that I've been really excited about for a very long time. An Ember in the Ashes by Sabah Tahir. I really hope I pronounced that right. But I have heard about this series for quite a while. I saw it in Barnes. I've seen it so many times in Barnes, but my husband was actually the one that convinced me to pick it up because the spine creates an image once you get all 4 books. So this is the first of 4. And he was like, oh, that'd be so pretty on our shelf. So he told me to buy all of them at once, but I don't do that. I can't buy a whole series at once unless maybe if it was a series I've already read and I know I love, I would buy it. But with it being young adult fantasy, so hit or miss for me. Like Powerless, wish I hadn't bought it. Sorry. But this one, on the other hand, I really, really liked it. I gave this one 4 stars. This book is dual POV, so you follow the main male character and the main female character, and it is first person, which I'm kind of like, sometimes I prefer third person, but this did it pretty well, and I'm pleased with it. So this story, you're following, like I said, these 2 main characters. The girl, what was her name? Leia. Her brother gets kidnapped in the in the very beginning of the book. Her brother gets arrested for like rebel activity kind of, and so she goes to the rebels and is like, hey, I need you to help me rescue my brother. So they send her to like the military academy as a slave to spy on the commandant who's like in charge of the military academy. The male point of view is this guy at the military academy, like he's about to graduate, and he hates his life. He hates everything about like the military and the empire and what it stands for, and he just wants to run away and be free and not have to be in this empire anymore. So you're kind of following these two characters and how their stories intertwine a little bit. This book very much felt like, not necessarily like it was setting up for the rest of the series. There was quite a bit of setup. I will say this author, very good world building. It's a very complex world, but the way the author keeps like referring to aspects of the world and kind of giving you little by little information, it was not overwhelming, very easy to follow, and I feel like I know what's going on at all times. So I really did appreciate that. And I feel like the characters were very well developed. It is young adult, so they're teenagers, so that they were, you know, doing normal teenager stuff and being annoying and angsty, which I was okay with because it's young adult, and it wasn't like annoying to read. Like there were times where I rolled my eyes, but overall I was like, yeah, that checks out. You're 17. That being said, the fact that they are teenagers is the only thing that makes this a young adult book. Again, you're dealing a lot with explicitly described torture, the threat of rape and sexual assault and violence, very prevalent. It's not explicit though. So it is not explicit. It's only like mentioned as like a fear or something that could happen, just like needing to be on your toes and stuff. I would not recommend this for the younger category of young adult, but like if you're in your late teens, that would be fine. One thing I was not crazy about in this book is the writing. It felt at times pretty monotone and just flat. Like there's a lot of emotional stuff happening in this book, but it never felt like the writing was matching the emotion. Like people would die or get hurt or things would happen that were a big deal, but it was just presented in the same way that like descriptions of the scenery were presented. So there was no emotional connection between me and the book, and the writing just fell flat pretty often for me, but the content was good, and I am very excited to continue the series. I came home after work one day and my husband surprised me with the second book in the series. So I'm very pleased that he got that for me. So I am going to be continuing the series. I do recommend it. I know I kind of had some harsh criticism of it, but I'm just a critical person. So overall, 4 stars. I did really like it. Then I listened to an audiobook. I listened to The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes. I read Jojo Moyes earlier this year when I read Me Before You. Absolutely loved it, obsessed with it, love that story. I gave it like 5 stars. The Giver of Stars, oh my gosh, it was so good. It was giving Kristen Hanna, okay? So it's historical fiction. The only main characters are female, which I love. The narrator did phenomenal, so good. Highly recommend the audiobook for this one. I borrowed it from Libby. And the story is about this, oh, what do they call it? The story is about the Pack Horse Library in Kentucky back in like the 1930s, I think. It is the Pack Horse Library, which was this incentive that went out to increase literacy and have more people learning how to read. So these female librarians would pack up all of these books, get on their horses, and ride into the mountains and deliver books to rural families that live in the mountain. And it was kind of like a mobile library. But it's so much more than that. You're exploring the dynamics of relationships between women, between married couples, and just like the tension and strife. And then it also gets into kind of, not politics necessarily, but just like coal miners are a big deal in this one. Like that's what a lot of people do. And so you have like the strife of like the workers in the mines and then the people that are benefiting from owning the mines and like ripping off their employees and stuff. So you get into that level of the politics, and then just like family feuds and dealing with reputations that you have in those small towns from like your family. Even if you haven't done anything wrong, you still have like your family's bad reputation on you. And it's so good. It was so interesting. It was emotional. Like, I really felt connected to all of these characters, and I think it was written beautifully. Jojo Moyes is an amazing, descriptive author, and she writes emotion really, really well. So overall, loved that one. I gave it 4 stars. Oh, I loved it so much. Give it a shot. It was a really quick read too. The last book I read was Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. I read this book for book club. So I joined a book club with some of my friends, and this was our first pick. And we kind of all agree that we didn't love it. But I think it's just because this specific book is written for a specific audience, and we are not that audience. This is character driven. It's almost like a character study in that there was no plot, really. You're just kind of following these people live their lives and discovering how they're all related, like interconnected. And then there's also an octopus who is one of the narrators. That was my favorite part of this book. The octopus, I think his name is Marcellus. He is nearing the end of his life, and he's in this aquarium where one of the main characters works. And so anytime that it was his chapter, it was only like a page or 2 long. They were very short chapters, and it was just his take on human life. And it was really humorous and insightful, and I really liked his chapters. There were not enough of them. The rest of the book was very slow, very hard to get through. I didn't love one of the characters, but I think you're not supposed to love him. He's a 30-year-old man-child and was just annoying to deal with. But you do see a little bit of character development from him, a little bit of growth. Overall, I think this is a case of just not for me. I gave it 3 stars because I can see why people rave about this book, but I just didn't relate to it at all, really. If it wasn't for book club, I probably would have DNF'd it. So, but it's beautiful. So I'm glad to have it on my shelf, but wouldn't recommend this one unless you're a big fan of character studies, in which case, sure, I guess. So those are all the books that I read in August and September. I am very glad to be kind of getting back on track of reading more. My goal for this year is 50 books, and I think I'm at like 40 now, so I think I'm gonna make it. Stay tuned for my October wrap up to see what I got into in October. I'm reading some really good books right now that I'm really excited to share with you guys. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.